unveiling shocking historical facts you didn't know. What if I told you everything you learned in history class was a complete lie? What if the most insane, unbelievable, and hilarious stories were left out of your textbooks on purpose? Well, get ready, because your mind is about to be blown. We are going to watch an entire army with machine guns lose a war to birds. Then, we'll see how one single pig almost started an actual world war between two global superpowers. And you will not believe this flood that was made of something 1,000 times stickier than water. This is the weirdest history you've ever seen. Let's do this. The Great Emu War. First up is literally the most ridiculous military conflict in all of history, the Great Emu War. No, you didn't mishear me. In 1932, the Australian government sent its actual army to fight emus. So check this out. It's after World War I, and a bunch of veterans become farmers. Life sucks. And then 20,000 emus show up. I'm talking 20,000 giant birds that can't even fly, and they start destroying all the farms. The farmers begged for help, so the government sent in the military. The plan was simple. An army major with 2 soldiers, 2 heavy machine guns, and 10,000 bullets. You'd think this would be an easy win, right? Wrong. On day 1, the soldiers set up an ambush, but the emus were tactical geniuses. A bird expert watching this war said the emus used guerrilla warfare. They split into tiny groups and scattered. The machine guns were as useless as trying to swat 1,000 flies with a sledgehammer. The targets were just too fast and unpredictable. A few days later, they tried ambushing over 1,000 emus at a dam. This was their big chance. They opened fire. The gun jammed after only a dozen kills, and the rest of the birds escaped. They even mounted a gun on a truck, but the emus literally outran the vehicle. It was so embarrassing. After a month of getting absolutely humiliated in the news, the army gave up. The official report said they killed 986 emus with 9,860 bullets. That's like needing to unload an entire rifle magazine just to hit one target. The emus won. An entire army lost the war to a bunch of birds. How one of the dumbest arguments in history almost started a massive war. In 1859, the United States and Great Britain almost declared war over this pig. It all went down on this island between Washington and Canada. Nobody knew who owned it, so Americans and Brits just lived there together. That all changed on June 15, 1859. An American farmer, Lyman Cutler, saw a pig eating his potatoes and shot it. Turns out the pig belonged to a British guy. Cutler offered him $10, but the British guy wanted 100. The argument went completely out of control. The British threatened to arrest Cutler, so the Americans called in the military. This tiny fight over a pig turned into an international crisis. It was like a neighborhood squabble over a fence suddenly escalating to a 911 call to the Pentagon. The U.S. sent in Captain George Pickett, yes, that Pickett from the Civil War. In response, Britain sent 3 warships. By August, it was 460 American soldiers with 14 cannons facing 5 British warships with over 2,000 men. It was a full-blown standoff. The world was watching. The British commander was ordered to attack, but he said it was stupid for 2 great nations to go to war over a pig. He flat out refused to give the order. Eventually, everyone chilled out, and they just shared the island for 12 years until Germany's Kaiser decided the U.S. could have it. The pig war ended with 0 people killed, all because of one hungry pig. Napoleon's Rabbit Rampage. Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the greatest military geniuses ever, but in 1807, he was forced to retreat by an army of fluffy bunnies. Okay, so this story is probably a legend, but it is too insane not to share. To celebrate a huge victory, Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexander Berthier, organized a massive rabbit hunt. He bought somewhere between a few hundred and 3,000 rabbits to make sure it was epic. The cages were all lined up. When Napoleon and his generals walked out, the doors opened. But when they released the rabbits, they didn't run away. They turned and charged right at Napoleon. At first, the men were laughing, but the laughter stopped when they were completely swarmed. It wasn't a hunt. It was like being attacked by a living furry carpet that was rolling right over them. An army of rabbits was literally attacking the most powerful man on the planet. They piled up between his legs and made him stumble. The conqueror of Europe had to retreat to his carriage, but the bunnies kept coming, only giving up when the carriage sped away. So why did this happen? Here's the crazy part. Berthier had bought tame, farm-raised rabbits, not wild ones. To them, a human didn't mean danger. It meant dinner. It was like a flock of seagulls spotting a guy with a bag of chips at the beach. They saw Napoleon and thought it was feeding time. In their quest for food, a bunch of hungry bunnies accidentally defeated Napoleon. If you are finding these stories as unbelievable as we are, smash that like button right now. The Great Molasses Flood. You've heard of water floods, but have you ever heard of a molasses flood? On January 15, 1919, an entire Boston neighborhood was destroyed by a giant wave of sticky goo. This sounds like something out of a cartoon, but it was a real and terrifyingly deadly disaster. A company had a gigantic tank on the waterfront, 50 feet tall, holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses. For years, people said the tank leaked and made weird noises, but the company did nothing. That day, it was unusually warm, and the molasses started to expand. Suddenly, with a sound like machine gun fire, the tank exploded like a bomb. A 25-foot tall wave of molasses, traveling 30 miles per hour, smashed through the city. Imagine a tsunami, but instead of water, it's a wave of hot tar moving as fast as a freight train. The force was unbelievable. Buildings were crushed, and a railway track was bent. But the real horror was the goo itself. It was so thick and sticky that people and horses were trapped. It was like being caught in a city-sized flypaper. The more they struggled, the more stuck they became. Rescuers couldn't get to victims in time. In the end, 21 people died and 150 were injured. For decades after, people said you could still smell the sweet molasses on hot summer days. The London Beer Flood. If you thought a molasses flood was insane, 100 years earlier, London had a beer flood. On October 18, 1814, the streets were flooded with beer after a gigantic vat at a brewery failed. This brewery had some of the biggest vats in the world. One vat was 22 feet tall and held a crazy amount of beer. That day, one of the iron rings holding it together just snapped. An hour later, the whole thing exploded like a bomb. A beer tsunami so powerful, it blew out the brewery's back wall and hit other vats like dominoes. Almost 400,000 gallons of beer flooded the streets. A 15-foot high wave of beer crashed into a poor, crowded neighborhood. This wasn't a party, it was a destructive brown river that acted like a flash flood. It completely destroyed 2 houses. In one house, a 4-year-old girl was swept away and killed. In another house, a building collapsed and killed 5 people at a wake. In total, 8 people died. And get this, the brewery was taken to court, but the disaster was called an act of God, and nobody was blamed. Andrew Jackson's swearing parrot. Last up, this story is so funny, I can't believe it's real. Andrew Jackson had a pet parrot that would not stop swearing. Jackson was a super tough guy, and apparently his pet parrot, Paul, learned all of the president's favorite curse words. He originally bought the parrot for his wife, but he ended up taking care of it. But the craziest part of the story happened at Andrew Jackson's own funeral in 1845. As all the mourners were gathered around, the parrot started screaming so many swear words that it completely interrupted the funeral. An eyewitness said the bird let out perfect gusts of cuss words. It was like a tiny feathered sailor had hijacked the solemn ceremony. Everyone was horrified. It got so bad, they had to literally kick the parrot out of the funeral. Now, we have to be honest, this account was written down 71 years later. We don't have a record of exactly what Paul said, but we can all use our imagination. An army losing to birds, a war almost started by a pig, and a parrot getting kicked out of a funeral.
These stories show that people in the past were just like us, full of surprises and chaos. If you enjoyed this, make sure you're subscribed. Which of these crazy facts blew your mind the most? Did we miss any of your favorite historical events? Drop them in the comments. Thanks for watching.